Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great show for you tonight. Our guest this evening is Martin Diaz with the Nomad Institute in Germany. He's from El Salvador. He's a political refugee in Germany and runs the Nomad Institute organization working for ending drug prohibition and for expanding our rights in the technological age. So stay tuned for that great interview. We have a few hemp news stories tonight, but first, let's bring on our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Our first hemp news story tonight is about polling here in the United States. A hefty majority of U.S. adults support national cannabis legalization, another new poll has found. This is the second national survey reflecting this reality released over the past week. Rasmussen reports asked Americans if they support the national legalization of marijuana, and 62% of the respondents said yes. Only 26% opposed legalization, and a wishy-washy 14% weren't sure. Even among Republicans, 54% said they back legalization. That compares to 68% of Democrats and 62% of those who said they had other political affiliations. 3 years ago, 54% of likely voters favored legalizing marijuana nationwide in the Rasmussen survey. The poll asked whether respondents felt legalization should be a federal, state, or local decision. About half, 47%, said the federal government should be in charge of legalizing cannabis. 32% said the state should make the decision, and 11% favor local action. Just over half of the respondents, or 53%, said they live in a state where cannabis is legal. Meanwhile, just 38% who said they didn't. Exactly half, or 50%, said they smoked marijuana versus 45% who said they hadn't. The only groups, in fact, with minority support for national marijuana legalization were those 65 or older, at just 40%, and those with an income over $200,000 or more a year. Only 38% of these rich people think that people should be able to use cannabis legally. The survey involved interviews with 1,000 Americans from October 21st through the 24th. The margin of error is 3 percentage points, plus or minus. This is the second poll showing majority support within a week. A few days ago, show a majority public support for pot legalization. A new survey from the Gallup found that 68% of American adults support legalization. That percentage remains unchanged since Gallup reported its last poll in November 2020, where support had reached its highest level since 1969. The release of these polls comes as congressional lawmakers continue to attempt reform. A House Judiciary Committee approved a legalization bill in September for the second year in a row. Senate leaders are pushing a plan to end federal marijuana prohibition as well. The next story is out of Fife, Washington. Use of certain portable THC vape cartridges may be associated with inadvertent exposure to various heavy metals, according to data published in the journal Chemical Research and Toxicology. Investigators affiliated with a Washington State Analytical Laboratory analyzed aerosol mixtures produced from 13 commercially available electronic cannabis cartridges. The researchers identified the presence of heavy metals, including copper and nickel, in both vapor and in the oil itself. The authors identified various parts of the cartridges, including the heating coils, wicks, metal cores, and mouthpieces, as a source of the elemental emissions. A higher prevalence of metal contaminants was identified following the use of the cartridge's heating mechanisms. Researchers identified an inverse relationship between metal contamination and terpene content, but they did not offer any definitive explanation for this phenomenon. The investigators reported, quote, "This study has shown that commercially available electronic cannabis devices, or ECDs, are a potential source for inhalation exposure to metals. Chromium, copper, nickel, as well as a smaller amount of lead, manganese, and tin migrate into the cannabis oil and are inhaled as vapor, resulting in the possible acute intake of an amount of inhaled metals above the regulatory standard of multiple government bodies. It was shown that leaching after periods of time at ambient or elevated temperatures was responsible for the migration of metals from the electronic cartridge devices into the liquid. The metal content of vaping aerosols decreased with the addition of terpenes to the cartridge liquid. At this time, the mechanism by which the addition of terpenes reduces these metal emissions is unknown, but future research is being undertaken to establish if this is a phenomenon unique to terpenes or if it's a general trait of less viscous liquids. End quote. Prior analysis of unregulated vapor pen products containing THC have similarly identified the presence of heavy metals and other adulterants. Separate analysis of the aerosols produced by nicotine-filled e-cigarette devices have also detected metal emissions. Metal exposure over time has been linked to a variety of serious health concerns, including lung disease, brain damage, and cardiovascular disease. The full text of this study, Metals in Cannabis Vaporizer Aerosols, Source, Possible Mechanism, and Exposure Profiles, appears in this month's edition of Chemical Research in Toxicology. Our last story tonight is a federal one. A representative with the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, has affirmed that the agency will continue to discriminate against those who use cannabis, including those who do so in compliance with state and local laws. In a letter addressed to U.S. House Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton, the agency said that it will continue to enforce policies that involve the, quote, termination of the tenancy of any household, end quote, in instances where a tenant is found to engage in the use of a controlled substance while on the premises, quote, including the use of state legalized medical marijuana, end quote. Well, that's just outrageous. We've got to get HUD to change that. Well, that's the end of our Hip News segment tonight. Now we have our interview with Martin Diaz. He is in Brandenburg, Germany, and he is an activist with the United Nations, well, at the United Nations, with his organization, Nomad Institute, advocating for marijuana legalization and especially in Central America. Martin is a great guest. I hope you like this interview and help us restore him. Good night. All right, I would like to introduce our guest, Martin Diaz. Martin, are you in Germany?
Yes, I'm in Brandenburg, near Berlin.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, there's some famous composer from Brandenburg, or the Brandenburg Concertos or something comes to mind when I hear that name. But I want to thank you for coming on our show. We first met in regard to a friend of ours who worked on this television show and volunteered. His name, Clay Pierce. He was arrested in El Salvador, and an attorney in El Salvador put me in touch with you and told me about your work. So since then, which is, I think, about 2018, 2017, maybe. Yeah, 2017. Yeah, that I've been following your organization, the Nomad Institute. Tell us what Nomad means.
Nomad, the word is knowledge nomad. Actually, this is a term of anthropologist from US, actually.
Oh, okay, okay. So you were originally from El Salvador as well.
Exactly.
And you moved to Europe and started this nonprofit NGO, non-government organization, and you've been actively involved with lobbying, I guess, in the United Nations. So why don't we start there? Tell us about your current work lobbying at the United Nations.
Yes, I started to work in the drug policy issues in Argentina. After that, I started to work to try to end the drug wars in El Salvador. But you know, the Northern Triangle of Central America, it's really a really red dot in this war. So my team and I suffer persecution.
Very dangerous.
Yes, actually, the drug trafficking organizations killed one of our volunteers after we make the first demonstration to end the drug wars in El Salvador in the framework of the Global Marijuana March in 2013. And yeah, after a lot of situations, we receive, my team and I receive a refugee in Uruguay. After that, we start to work trying to make visible the situation of the peripheral countries, in specific of Mesoamerica, in the UN. And after the 2016 General Assembly of United Nations about drugs, we come to Germany because it's so close of the UNODC headquarters. And yeah, we start to work here with the Nomad Institute around 2017, 2018. And yeah, we are making research and advocacy at the UNODC, trying to make visible the situation of drug war, not only in Mesoamerica, but we're focused in the peripheral countries because all regions are really invisibilized in all this war. And if you see the line of tropics are the most affected regions, I mean, in terms of pain and blood and all these things. And it's important make visible the situation there to have a real reform, a humanitarian reform of drug policies.
So I want to thank you for doing that work in El Salvador. So you actually had a march in San Salvador in 2013, and that led to death threats.
Yes, because we start to collect signs to modify the national law, and yeah, we start to receive threats and some attempts against my team and I. And actually, they killed one of our volunteers of our harm reduction program. And when I mean when I say harm reduction, it's really different of the concept in US or in Europe because it's more basic. For example, now it's different because that is in 2013. Now in 2021 is really different. But in that moment, the actions are, for example, bring paper to make the joints because the people who use cannabis don't have access to this kind of paper. So they smoke in newspaper, with a lot of chemicals of the tint and all these things.
Yeah, wood, it's made out of wood, and wood, when burned, is toxic. Most people don't know our cigarette papers for tobacco are either hemp or flax. It's about 50-50. But by law in America, tobacco cigarettes have to be rolled in either hemp or flax paper. And so the flax comes from Spain to mills here in the United States. But that's aside the point. So people in El Salvador that were actually using newsprint, which would be toxic just because it's wood, and then it's toxic because it's covered in inks.
Exactly. So we start to give these kind of papers and condoms and another harm reduction actions, but really basics. So because we start this in 2012, and yeah, sadly, after we received the refugee in Uruguay, the demonstrations, the march in El Salvador stopped. So
Yeah.
Because it's really dangerous to make these kind of actions without repression or
Murdered your associate. That's horrible that one of your volunteers was murdered over this. That's what was that person's name?
For the family, I can say
Oh,
because in that moment,
well,
yeah,
that's
sorry.
something else to
But
talk about, the danger in El Salvador. And tell us about the situation there with cannabis and the penalties for cannabis in El Salvador.
okay, so actually, the case of Clay was a point of change. Actually, all the jurisprudence in El Salvador, because before this case, if you have, for example, one seed to 1 gram, you can stay in the prison for 2 years.
Two
From one
years
seed
or up
point.
to 1 gram,
Yeah,
0 to
exactly,
1 gram, 2 years.
exactly. And in a castle, in a prison in El Salvador, is not the same thing in the developed country
I,
prisons. You know.
I went to Mariana, the prison in El Salvador, to visit Clay. And so I got to get in and see the conditions there. And they're horrific. A lot of people say that that's the most dangerous prison in the world. I know our friend Clay, when he got out, he had an infection that nearly cost him his life. He spent about 2 months in a hospital with a flesh-eating bacteria and had to have a lot of his body or some of his body, removed. And I know when I went there, I worked with the lawyer who put us in touch, and we, with his law firm, we had a press conference, and it was covered on television and newspaper there. And I think that was probably pretty unusual. I'm really happy to hear it's caused some change.
Yes, because you know the case of Clay was reviewed for the Supreme Court. So in El Salvador, the resolutions of the Supreme Court are vinculated. So the parliament need to respect these decisions. The problem is, so after the Clay case, the new law, or actually the jurisprudence, say from 38 grams of flowers and actually extracts are is not for interest to penal interest. So the problem is,
Really?
in theory, this resolution pushed to the security minister to make a mailing to all the police and prosecutors saying this. The problem is the national government not communicate this, so it's like in a great area. So, if, for example, someone with 15 grams or 10 grams of cannabis is detained by the police, they can say, here is this resolution of the Supreme Court, that's it. But the problem is, this information is not accessible for the lawyers, or actually a lot of people don't have the money to pay a lawyer. So it's really difficult because the government don't have any motivation or political compromise commitment with this. So now it's like some limbo in this aspect. And yeah, actually after 2016, we see two proposals to approve medical cannabis, but with any successful term. Yeah.
So now is the penalty still the same for 1 gram or less? Is it still 2 years that people will be penalized for less than a gram or less? Or has that changed?
In the practice is the same. It's sadly
So,
because actually you can find because the police is really, they have a lot of propaganda with this kind of detention. So you can see in the official account, Twitter account of the police in El Salvador, when they have, I don't know, for example, a woman for around 80 years with a portion of cannabis, with 3 cups, with masks and heavy weapons. So it's tremendous. I mean, I can send you some of these photos to show in your program if you want.
I was there, for just 3 days, and I did get to visit Mariana Prison and have that press release, and I got to visit a very nice archaeological site for the Mayan ruins outside. I think it's San Andreas outside of El Salvador. I think I scared your lawyer. Yeah, your lawyer was afraid I was going to get killed there, I think. But yeah, I enjoyed seeing it. It was very fascinating. I like to see things like that. But so there's a ruling by your Supreme Court in El Salvador that says 38 grams or less of cannabis or cannabis extracts is not. What's the penalty now? If under that Supreme Court ruling, if a defendant is able to reference it in court, do they get a lower penalty? I remember that Clay was facing 20 years. He had, as I recall, at the San Salvador airport. He was not by the way, Clay Pierce was not coming to El Salvador on that trip. He simply had a layover on his flight. And somehow they went through his baggage and found, as I recall, about 30 grams of flower, cannabis flowers, and 30 grams of cannabis extracts. And so maybe it was a little bit more than that, but it was about that amount. And so he was looking at 20 years in terms of, even though he wasn't even planning on visiting El Salvador, he just happened to have a layover at the airport. So that's pretty unusual that they would pull him out of the international zone of the airport and treat him like he was, violating the national laws there.
Actually, in that moment, the case of Pierce and the case of Andrés Alemán was a very symbolic, both cases, because Andrés Alemán, when they are arrested.
So was he El Salvadoran?
Sorry?
Was he Salvadoran?
Yes.
Or was he from somewhere? Okay.
No, Clay, they know to play in the jail. They say in the same jail in the same time.
Oh, yes. Okay.
The thing is, Daniel Alemán was actually a teenager when the police arrest him.
Just a teen.
Sorry?
So a young man, just a teenager.
Yes, a teenager. And he was playing football. And this kind of church, you don't have bags. So the police put the cannabis and say, you have cannabis and all this. So they create a fake case around Daniel. Now he's free. These both cases are changed the point of view of the liars and some prosecutors in El Salvador. So what's really important, actually, when we participate in the Commission of Narcotic Drugs, in the moment was both of them stay in jail, we present a statement to visibilize the case of Clay and the case of Daniel Alemán in the UN, and we bring the statement to the US Embassy and the representation of El Salvador and other countries because the first was you say the thing they are in the international part of the airport, and like it's a gray area because he have a medical receipt, and in Colombia they have also a medical cannabis law. So yeah, these kind of points are important to discuss in the reform, international reform, because it's their medicine.
Yeah, I went to the
Actually, in the case of clay.
Yeah, I went to the Oregon State Capitol to get special certification of his medical records and his medical marijuana permits because he had seen our doctors at our clinics here in Oregon. So I was able to get that certification at the Oregon Secretary of State's office at the state capitol. Had to drive there to get that certification. But so now, what would be the penalty today for cannabis in El Salvador?
Now it's the same. Suddenly it's the same. We don't
So
see
if you have grams, you're subject to 20 years or more in prison. And less than a gram, it's 2 years.
Yeah, and the fact is, if you see all the statistics of the prison office and prosecution office, the mayor of people in jail for crimes related with drugs are from less than 25 grams of cannabis. And you can find a little few people in jail for more than 1 kilo of cocaine, to have an idea of the situation.
So
In a country where past the 9% of cocaine from South America to North America, so it's ridiculous.
So a kilo of cocaine in El Salvador has the same penalty as 25 grams of cannabis.
Yep.
That's amazing. That's amazing. But
not only that, I mean the quantity of people in jail for less than 25 grams of cannabis is the most quantity of people in prison for drug-related crimes. And you view only few cases of people in jail for more than 1 kilo of cocaine.
Wow, that's amazing. And I know El Salvador is a transit state for bringing cocaine. And obviously, you know, here in America, most people realize that a lot of that is controlled by the intelligence agencies and the police themselves. And so here in America, we've had journalists that have been killed because they talk about how the CIA has been involved in bringing cocaine in to finance their dirty wars. And so including they're in El Salvador and Nicaragua and Central and South America. So I know that that's one of the big problems throughout the world, is that these drug prohibition laws have led directly to police corruption and caused, you know, this upside down system where, like in the case of that other fellow who was in Mariana prison with clay, they will plant drugs on people that they don't like and try to extort money from them. And here in America, we have those property forfeiture laws that have led to more police corruption as well. But what is the status now in El Salvador? Is there any movement toward ending this? I mean, I know you've been working on an international level with the United Nations to try to change, and you've been very successful with a group of other people, of course. But is there any movement in El Salvador to change the status quo?
Sadly, not. But you know, now I want to make a parenthesis because you saying something about historical things from Nicaragua, Iran Contras, and all these things, and you know all the thing with Oliver North, etc., is in El Salvador, in the Hangar 5 of the Air Force base, and also in the ex-president Cristiani tried to give refugee to Pablo Escobar and the family in El Salvador. So the political class in El Salvador is closely related with the drug trafficking organizations, and that is the same now. But in now in 2021, I guess we can see some difference because the last year, you know, in December 2, the Commission of Narcotic Drugs approved the recommendation of the World Health Organization. So actually, El Salvador voted in favor to these recommendations.
Representatives supported the change.
Yes, 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 but it's the same. Like, for example, here in Germany, that is the position at international level, but don't have any concordance with the situation in the country.
It takes a long time for that to filter down to the national levels. But here in America, as we work to legalize marijuana, they would always cite, well, it's illegal because of these international treaties, the United Nations treaties on psychotropic substances, and the Single Convention Treaty of 1961 and its amendments. They said because of these treaties and the fact that it was prohibited internationally, they couldn't change that law. But now the World Health Organization has changed that, but it's going to take many years for that to filter down country by country to through the judicial process.
Normally, it's maybe between 4 and 6 years, depend of the national laws, because in some countries, to change this kind of law, you need 2 periods of the parliament. So it's not, the question now is not if they change to regulate cannabis or not, it's only when and how. So for us, the challenge now is to prevent the new regulated market of cannabis, but not transform like a neo-colonialist weapon against the peripheral countries. Because we can see this, for example, with the regulation in Canada. So some Canadian companies are buying a lot of lands in Colombia, South Africa, Lesotho, for example. That is actually a neo-colonialist actions, because they don't bring new or they don't bring works to people who traditionally grow cannabis. They only bring work to Canadians. So we are trying to work to prevent this kind of practices.
I don't know if you know it, but I was robbed by a group of Canadians. Are you aware of that? Yeah, they came in and you met my director, William Appel. He was working with me in our clinic business, and a group of Canadians came through and said they were going to help take our company public. And instead, they used forged documents and presented them to the courts. And they took control of my very profitable company. And they fired me and they fired Bill, and they took over the company. And the courts just pretend they definitely bought our local judges. So it shows that corruption is just as bad here as it is in El Salvador. It's not quite as deadly. They haven't killed me, but they took our company, and the courts just gave it to them. And I demanded a jury trial. They wanted the judge to decide. The judge was not going to ever rule in our favor. So I demanded a jury trial. Just a couple of weeks before the jury trial was scheduled to begin, they dismissed their case. And so they'd already taken everything from me, my business, my property. I'd spent my money on lawyers. They spent $2 million on lawyers to steal my business from me. And then they took it public on the Canadian Stock Exchange. And just this year, its value spiked to over 800 million Canadian dollars, or 500 million US dollars. But my partner, I only have about $4,000 worth of stock. That's how they paid me. They gave me $4,000. They made 500 million, and here's 4,000. Of course, I spent $170,000 on lawyers about 6 months. So I have direct experience being robbed by these Canadian capitalists myself. I understand how you weren't aware of that. I don't broadcast it all the time. I talk about it on the show a little bit, but you know, I see the Canadians as well in Colombia buying up land and setting up companies to export to their market, and they're trying to and like you said, they're buying property in South Africa as well, and they're in El Salvador to try to monopolize, and they're trying to set up the laws that allow them to create a monopoly to keep everyone else out. And that's obviously something that you've run up with in your work, even with the United Nations.
Yeah, of course. And actually, another thing is talking about Canada. It's the future markets. For us, it's really dangerous because, for example, we see a really strange thing in Canada because they start the ETF market of cannabis. They open a ETF, a future market of cannabis, a week before start the regulations. So they start to speculate with the market before the law start to be applied, you know. So this for us is really dangerous because it's not a commodity for us. It's not like coffee or chocolate, because it's not only for recreational use, but it's also a medicine, and you can't speculate with medicine. This is inhuman.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more about you, Martin. You're wearing a clerical collar, so you are a Protestant minister.
Yes, I'm a Protestant priest.
Okay, and so tell us how you came to be involved in cannabis reform, and how I know you mentioned you went to Argentina for a while. Next week, I get to go to Resistencia in the Argentinian state of Chaco to a conference there. They're flying me out for that for a few days. And I haven't been back to Argentina since 2015. And I had never actually, when I was in Argentina, I was in Buenos Aires and I drove across through Mendoza. I drove across Argentina back and forth going to Santiago, Chile. But I hadn't heard of Resistencia Chaco. I hadn't heard of that state of Argentina. I wasn't aware of that. But it's nice to be invited to go.
Place.
That's what I heard. I heard it's very, very hot. Well, it's very cool and rainy here. So so you've been to Resistencia?
No.
Oh, no. Okay. Yeah, it's closer.
Yeah. So when I stay in Buenos Aires, in the theological faculty in the university, before that I worked in the LGTB rights and sexual and reproductive rights before I start to work in drug policy reform. But in Argentina, you know, because I'm from El Salvador, so talking about drugs was really a stigmatized topic, a taboo topic. So actually, before my experience in Argentina, I was a prohibitionist guy. But
okay.
But in Argentina, I I saw in the youth groups, the issues not only from sex but also with drugs are the most important topics in that groups. So I start to make a harm reduction pastoral there and learn with groups, because in Argentina you have a lot of self-growing. Is that correct? Self-growing?
Yeah,
Grow cannabis? Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah, so we start to work with them, and what's really interesting, because first they have this stigmatized reaction to see me with this and think I'm there to try to change their minds, but we make a process to know each others and make a mutual edification, to know why they use the cannabis, and I learn about them, and yeah, and I see also a lot of problems from my region are actually for the prohibition, because promote corruption and promote a lot of related crimes around the drug trafficking organizations. So the problem is not the people who use drugs. The problem is the criminal organizations, and the problem is the irresponsibility of the government to bring this market to the criminals. That's the problem. So that is when I start to work in this topic. And after time studying, etc., I saw actually the importance to regulate not only cannabis but also all the drugs, and with a focus especially with psychedelics, because that is the future of the mental health, the public mental health services. Because we have in Latin America and in the peripheral countries, we have a lot of problem with the mental health issues, because we don't have a mental health laws. We don't have resources to this. So one of the solutions is actually use the science and all the research we have now about psychedelics therapies.
Here in Oregon, we voted last November, a year ago, to legalize psilocybin use for doctor-directed or supervised experiences. So the regulations are still being put together by a group of professionals, including a couple of doctors that we work with, the Knox family. And they're working with the board to develop the specific rules regarding that. And so by this time next year, we should have legal psilocybin or mushroom dosing centers that are supervised by medical professionals. So I think we were one of the first states to do that. I know some cities had done it before that, but you've been working on that as well.
Yeah, because it's really important, and also it's important to have a variety of protocols, because the things, maybe some protocols can work in North America, but not work in South America or Central America, for example. So we need more research, and we need more protocols to make this kind of therapies, not only one kind of protocols, because maybe this is not a really normal issue in your program, but we need to prevent the neocolonialism with this kind of topics, because it's necessary to.
I believe I strongly agree with you as well that we need to stop this colonialism that has, spread around the world to disadvantage the indigenous people, and as the Canadians are doing quite openly in the cannabis market. But it's been going on for 500 years, and we've got to move to stop it. I agree.
Yeah, and the difference now is we have the democratization of new technologies of communication. So now we can preserve the atmosphere and make something more multipolar and balanced, international balanced regulations.
That's exciting. So when you first left El Salvador, was that in 2013 or 2014?
At the final of 2013.
Okay, and so then you went to Uruguay.
Yes, Montevideo.
So was that like a as a refugee because you were under threat, or did you have
Yep.
did you get status to immigrate to Uruguay and Germany based on
in Europe? I received. Sorry.
Did you get status based on the threats to your life as to immigrate?
Yes, I receive, and me and my team receive a status of refugee in Uruguay in the time of the government of Pepe Mujica, and actually we make we conduct a research about the first 2 years of the regulation of cannabis in Uruguay, and we published this in 2016. And actually, the UN World Drug Report site of or research about the Uruguay and regulation.
I was there as well in Uruguay in 2014 and 2015 at the first 2 Expo Cannabis events that happened in Montevideo, and so it was Uruguay. Obviously, our audience probably knows it's the first country as a nation state to legalize cannabis, and so that went into effect. So your study of that was used by other entities, governmental entities.
Yes, actually, one of the things we saw in that moment, now something are changed, but in that moment, now something are the same because have a gray area, because the legalization is only for residents in Uruguay. So the tourists buy cannabis or use cannabis. So this create a great market, and that is really difficult because it's tolerated by the government, but at the same time it's actually a criminal organization. So yeah, it's important to take in account the adult use of cannabis in the regulations. It's not only from the people who live in the place, but from all adults. So that is I think need to change in Uruguay. And also talking about the ethnosphere, at the first period of the Uruguayan law, they only accept 7 kind of seeds, the government seeds.
I'm aware of that. Friends who
now are
friends
more.
who are
Now are more, but the problem is bring only a certain number of seeds. Okay, of seeds is dangerous for the biodiversity. So there is a big topic if we are moving to a global regulation. We need to actually see for the preservation of the biodiversity, because it's important not only for the traditional farmers and their practices, but also we are talking all the time about the climate change and NGOs, etc. So this is the same. We need to preserve the biodiversity of the plant.
I wholly agree. And there's a lot of different, we call land races where cannabis has been acclimated to the local culture all over the world. So we're almost done. If someone is interested in finding out more about your organization, or they want to help the Nomad Institute, and it says it's European Institute for Multidisciplinary Studies on Human Rights, and kind of cuts off there. What comes after?
And
Human
science.
rights and science. Okay. Good, good. Tell us about your organization, how we can contact you and help you.
You can find us in the social media like Nomad Institute. I know it's really difficult to to write. So sometimes we need to explain why, but
Yeah.
for
Knowledge and know that. I like that.
exactly. Yeah, because a lot of our team are displaced people, so we are around the world. So we feel the connection with this concept of knowledge nomads. And yeah, we have two programs actually. We have one program about drug policy and human rights, and another one about technological sovereignty and human dignity. And actually, these two programs have a crossroad because you know, a lot of people who works making artificial intelligence, blockchain, or develop this kind of emergent technologies are people who use drugs. And in some occasions, they have problems with drug use. I don't say addicts, obviously. I say a problematic consumption of this. And it's important to bring access, easy access of mental health services to the people who are building the future. Because they are building the future. And they only receive, for example, a telephone number to prevent the suicide. But that is not mental health access. So that is important for us to promote this and the normalization of the plant, because actually a lot of developers are users of cannabis, and this is not a problem, but they are stigmatized too. So it's important to see this, and also to how we can adopt this kind of technologies to protect the privacy and anonymity of the cannabis patients, for example. For example, in Uruguay, have a list of users. So you to buy, you need to bring your name and stay in a list of the government like you are a cannabis user. So the problem is, if come a far-right government or a heavy conservative, they can make a persecution against the people who use cannabis. And if you adopt, for example, blockchain, and you can make a multi-key smart contract, so you have the one key and another key is from the government, and the government see your information if you don't approve this access, and vice versa. So this is important too, not only specifically for cannabis, but I mean also for medical records. This is really important. So
in that takeover of my clinic had 270,000 patients' medical records. That's what they were really after. And that's what they got. They got the records of all those 270,000 Americans that had come through our clinics. And that's what they were really, really after. I didn't mean to interrupt you. What?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, we have these two programs, and we have a journal. So we try to bring the knowledge of the peripheral countries to development countries, because you know, normally the development countries bring their think tanks to our countries and bring their ideas. So we are trying to do the same, but from the peripheral countries to development countries, because the Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia make science too. So yeah, we invite you, if you are interested in our work, to visit our website, nomadinstitute.org. And you can find us in the social media like Nomad Institute.
All right. Well, I think I sure hope this helps build your organization, and that some people will see this and help your work. And I'm motivated as well to see what I can do to help. I know I mentioned to the lawyer Ricardo that I would be willing to go back and help make presentations there in San Salvador, but I understand people are afraid if they're killing you. That's, you know, it's very dangerous if they're going to do that. Do you think that it's any safer now? I mean, you can't go back to El Salvador yourself, right?
Sadly not, because after I move out to El Salvador, I actually continue talking about the situation there and complain politicians and people related with this corruption and criminal organizations. So I came back to my country, sadly. But someone to talk about this, so
Well, I'm willing to go there and talk some more. I talked to him about doing it at the university in San Salvador. I don't know if that's possible, but maybe we can work together to make that happen.
yeah, and also Ricardo is part of the Nomad Institute
Yeah,
too.
yeah. It's Langlois. How do you pronounce his last name? Langlois. Okay. I didn't want to mispronounce it.
French actually.
Yeah, it's a French name, but and he's from Nicaragua, but they're all close together down there.
Yeah.
But it was great working with him. I think Clay's case was his first case out of once he was licensed. He was licensed in the middle of that.
Yes.
He was working with his boss Evelyn, and he got licensed, and that's a good case for his first one. I hope he's doing well. So again,
and make history, the case of Clay, it's one before the Clay case. This is really important for the road to change the things in El Salvador.
All right. Well, hopefully we can push things a little farther. But I appreciate you coming on here, Martin Diaz. You're with the Nomad Institute.org. The Nomad Institute. You're based in Germany today, but as a refugee. So I want to thank you for coming on again, Martin, and hopefully we can have you back on soon.
Thank you, Paul, for your time and for the invitation. And when you want, I can come.
Okay, I look forward to that. Thank you. All right, this has been Martin Diaz with the nomadinstitute.org. Thank you for your work and keep working to restore hemp. Good night.